"This one's just sentimental junk," my daughter Elisa said, tapping the canvas of a simple landscape painting. But the dealer offered a few hundred for the frame. That junk was her father's first gift to me. That junk was all she left me when she put me in the sterile white room and walked away with the keys to my life. For 30 years, he and I traveled the world collecting these pieces, not as investments, but as bookmarks for our life together. Henry had the eye. I had the history. He could spot a minor masterpiece in a dusty flea market in Brussels. I could trace its provenance back 300 years from a faded signature. Our home wasn't just filled with paintings, it was filled with stories. The portrait from our honeymoon in Florence, the abstract from that rainy weekend in New York, each one a chapter of our story. A story my daughter sold, piece by piece, to pay for brunch and designer shoes. After Henry died, the color bled from my world. The paintings were all I had left of him, of us. But Elisa, my only child, needed me, or rather, she needed what I could provide. Her ambition was a bonfire that required constant fuel, and I was the forest she was willing to burn. It started small. I paid for her master's degree in marketing. I funded her first failed startup, custom jewelry line that produced more debt than necklaces. I co-signed the loan for her first luxury car. Each time, she swore it was the last time, the one thing she needed to finally get on her feet. Each time, I chose to believe her. A mother provides. That is what we do. We give until we are empty, hoping our love will be enough to fill the void. When she married Mark, a man whose ambition matched her own, their appetites grew. Their wedding, a lavish affair at a country club, cost more than my annual pension. I paid for it. Their first home, a sprawling modern construction they couldn't afford, was made possible by a gift from me that drained my liquid savings. I didn't mind. I told myself I was building her future. But I wasn't. I was building a monument to my own irrelevance. My visits to their home became exercises in quiet humiliation. The conversation would stop when I entered a room. My opinions on art, my life's work, were dismissed with an eye roll. "Oh, mother, that's so old-fashioned," Elisa would say. I became mother, a title, not a person, a walking, talking bank account with outdated anecdotes. The liquidation began a year ago. Elisa started by suggesting we catalog the collection for insurance purposes. I was so grateful for her sudden interest that I didn't see the appraisal forms she was filling out. The first piece to go was a small watercolor of up the scene. "It's just the minor work, Mother," she explained. "The proceeds will pay for the kids' summer camp." I didn't protest. The next was a series of charcoal sketches by a lesser-known artist Henry and I had championed. "They're just sitting in a dusty room," she argued. "This is a practical way to secure my family's future." The family I was apparently no longer a part of. The desecration was methodical. My memories were sold to fund ski trips, kitchen renovations, and private school tuition. Each sale was a small death, another page ripped from the story of my life with Henry. I begged her to stop. "Elisa, please, not this one," I pleaded when she targeted the Florentine portrait. "It's your father bought it for our 5th anniversary." She looked at me then with an expression I will never forget. Not cruelty, not anger, just a profound, chilling indifference. "It's just the thing, Mother. You're being sentimental. It's worth 60,000 euros. That's a new roof." The final blow came last Tuesday. She arrived with a folder from The Willows, an upscale retirement community. Safe, quiet, predictable. "I've sold the rest of the collection to a private dealer," she announced, her voice as polished and empty as her new granite countertops. "This'll be much better for you. No stairs, on-site nursing, and you won't have to worry about the upkeep of the house." I stared at her, unable to process the scale of the betrayal. She wasn't just selling the art. She was selling my home, my life, my history. She was erasing me.
The last thing I remember is her hanging the sentimental junk on the wall of my new sterile room. Her final charitable act. A worthless landscape, she said, to give the place a touch of home. She thought she was liquidating assets. She thought she was clearing out clutter. She didn't know she was handing me the very weapon I needed for my return. Because she's right. It is junk. Sentimental junk, worth about 50 million euros. And I'm the only person on Earth who can prove it.
The first 3 days at the Willows were a study in white. White walls, white sheets, the white noise of the air conditioner. Elisa had called it serene. I called it a tomb for the living. My world, once a symphony of color and history, had been reduced to a 10 by 12-foot box and one last lonely painting, the landscape, her father's first gift. It hung opposite my bed, a window into a life that was no longer mine. They had even taken my books, replacing them with a small curated selection of large print novels. Thoughtful, I'm sure. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, the silence of the room amplifying the ringing in my ears. I felt nothing. Not grief, not anger, just the profound hollow ache of being erased. She hadn't just sold things. She had sold my memories, my past, my very identity. And I had let her. On the 4th night, I couldn't sleep. The ghost of Henry was in the room with me, not as a comfort, but as a challenge. I could almost hear his voice, that dry academic wit he had. "Well, Marguerite," he would have said, "are you going to let her get away with it?" I got out of bed and walked to the painting. It was a simple pastoral scene by a forgotten 19th century artist named Jean-Pierre Valmont. Or so the art world believed. But I remember the day Henry brought it home from a small auction in Provence. He was vibrating with an energy I hadn't seen in years. "They don't know what they have," he had whispered, his eyes gleaming. He turned the canvas over. Tucked into a tiny flap he'd fashioned in the linen backing, sealed with wax, was a small folded piece of vellum. His lost masterpiece, Henry had explained, painted under a pseudonym. But this is the only proof that matters. A certificate of authenticity, signed by Valmont himself. I ran my fingers over the back of the painting now, feeling for the slight bulge in the canvas. It was still there. Elisa, in her haste to liquidate my life, hadn't noticed the most valuable part. She saw the art, but she never understood the history. That was her fatal mistake. The next morning, the fog of despair had been replaced by a chilling clarity. The first call was to a payphone in the lobby. I couldn't risk using the phone in my room. I had no doubt Elisa had arranged to monitor my communications for my safety. I called Genevieve, my old colleague from the Louvre, a woman who owed her entire career to a discovery Henry and I had helped her with decades ago. I described the painting not by its pseudonym, but by its real title, Valmont's Last Sunrise. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Marguerite," she whispered, "that's a myth. It was lost during the war." "It's been found, Genevieve," I said, "and it's about to go on the market, but the seller doesn't have proper provenance. Keep your eyes open." I didn't need to say more. She understood. The second call was to a man named Lucien Dubois, a discreet art lawyer Henry had used for his most sensitive acquisitions. I explained the situation, the fraudulent sale, the certificate of authenticity I held. "The dealer who bought the collection," Lucien said, his voice a low hum of professional interest. "Do you have his name?" I Celamison. Elisa mentioned a Mr. Corbin, known for dealing in estates, not entirely scrupulous. Lucien chuckled. "Corbin is a predator. He preys on grieving families buying collections for pennies on the dollar. He likely paid Elisa a fraction of the collection's worth and convinced her he was doing her a favor. But Valmont's Sunrise? That is another level of fraud.
If he tries to sell it without proper authentication, he will be destroyed. The plan formed with the clean, cold logic of a legal brief. Lucien would prepare the documents asserting my ownership of the entire collection based on fraudulent conveyance. But we would not act yet. We would wait. Corbin, believing he possessed the score of a lifetime, would not be able to resist showing it off. He would try to get it authenticated under the false name, perhaps create a new provenance. Eventually, he would announce its sale at a major auction house, Sotheby's or Christie's. He would set the stage for his greatest triumph. What he didn't know was he was building his own gallows. The moment the auction catalog was published, the moment he publicly laid claim to that painting, Lucien would strike. We would present the true certificate of authenticity. We would file the lawsuit. Corbin would be exposed as a fraud, his career ruined. Elisa, as his co-conspirator who provided the stolen art, would be implicated. The value of the entire collection she sold would be reassessed based on this new spectacular discovery, and the debts she would owe the estate would be catastrophic. Her inheritance wouldn't just be gone. It would be a negative number so large she would spend the rest of her life paying for it. I returned the certificate to its hiding place behind the canvas. I did not have to make a single move. I just had to wait for their greed to do the work for me. They had buried me in a white room surrounded by silence. They didn't realize they had given me the one thing I needed most: time to think.
For 6 months, I played the part of the contented resident of the Willows. I attended the watercolor classes. I made polite conversation in the dining hall. I read the large print novels they left for me. Elisa would visit every other Sunday, bringing flowers and a manufactured smile. Her visits were brief, her questions superficial. "Are you comfortable, Mother? Are the staff treating you well?" She never asked about Henry. She never mentioned the paintings. She was like someone visiting a distant monument, paying her respects out of a sense of duty, eager to tick a box and get on with her life. She told me about their new life, funded by my past, a ski trip to Chamonix, a new Tesla for Mark, the down payment on a summer home in Deauville. I would nod and smile, a perfect portrait of a doting, slightly senile mother, proud of her daughter's success. She had no idea she was confessing to her own executioner. The news I was waiting for arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet email from Genevieve. It was a link to the spring preview catalog for Sotheby's London. And there it was, Lot 27, a shepherd's view of Giverny, attributed to a follower of Monet. The estimate was a respectable but unremarkable £200,000. It was my painting. Corbin was making his move. I forwarded the email to Lucien with a single word: begin. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering, conducted in absolute silence from my room at the Willows. Lucien filed the lawsuit not just against Corbin, but against Elisa, claiming fraudulent representation and seeking the immediate return of the entire collection, or its full market value. Simultaneously, he sent a certified letter to Sotheby's, including a notarized copy of Valmont's original certificate of authenticity, and a preliminary expert opinion from Genevieve confirming its veracity. The auction house, facing a catastrophic scandal, immediately pulled the painting from the auction and froze the entire Corbin collection, pending a legal review. Elisa's panicked call came on a Tuesday. "Mother, something terrible has happened," she said, her voice tight with a fear I had never heard before. "Sotheby's has seized all of Mr. Corbin's inventory. He's being investigated for fraud. He says it has to do with that old landscape painting." I let a moment of silence hang in the air.
imagining the blood draining from her face. "That's odd," I said, with practiced confusion. "I thought you said it was junk." "The police are involved," she whispered. "They say all the sales are void because I didn't have the legal right to sell. They say I might be charged as an accomplice." There it was, the crack in the marble facade. "That does sound serious. Perhaps you should have been more careful with your father's estate." She was crying now. "Mother, they're talking about the full value of the collection, the insurance appraisals, the new auction estimates. It's millions, tens of millions. I'm ruined. Mark is going to leave me. We'll lose everything." "Yes," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. "You probably will." He came to me a week later. Not Elisa. Mark. He sat opposite me in the sterile visitor's lounge of the Willows, his tailored suit looking out of place. He tried to project confidence, but his eyes were filled with the terror of a man watching his perfectly constructed world burn to the ground. "This has all been a terrible misunderstanding, Marguerite. Elisa was just trying to manage your affairs. We can fix this." I looked at him, the man who had stood silently while his wife sold my life away. "The time for fixing things has passed, Mark. Now is the time for consequences." He pleaded. He threatened. He tried to reason. Then, broken, he asked, "What do you want? Name your price. We'll pay it." I leaned forward. "I don't want your money," I said. "I want my life back. The entire collection returned. Not to me, but to a new foundation established in Henry's name. You and Elisa will have no part in it. And Elisa, she will have a choice. She can face criminal charges for fraud, or she can accept my alternative offer." "What alternative?" "I am acquiring a small private restoration studio. It needs a new apprentice. The work is meticulous, painstaking, and requires absolute devotion. The pay is minimum wage. Elisa will work there under my direct supervision for the rest of her life. She will spend her days restoring the very legacy she tried to erase. That is my prize." That was a year ago. The Henry Renow Art Foundation now manages his collection, lending pieces to museums around the world. Valmont's Last Sunrise hangs in a place of honor at the Louvre. And Elisa, she arrives at the studio every morning at 9. The designer clothes are gone, replaced by a simple work apron. Her hands, once adorned with expensive rings, are now stained with turpentine and varnish. She's learning slowly the value of history, the weight of artistry, the price of a memory. I don't know if she will ever truly understand what she did. I don't know if there's redemption for a soul so empty. But as I watch her meticulously cleaning a 17th century canvas, I know one thing for certain. She is finally learning how to take care of something other than herself. They say forgiveness is a virtue, but sometimes justice is a higher calling. Never let them tell you your life's work is worthless. Sometimes it's the most valuable weapon you have. Tell me in the comments, what have you built with your time and love that you'd fight to the end to protect?